Welcome all of you on behalf of IIC Impact Investors Council on this very interesting workshop on mainstreaming blended finance for WASH. All of you would be having this program structure on your table. Yeah, a piece of paper with two sheets. So as you can see that we will start off with opening and context setting, after which we have discussion on some of the existing finance structures in WASH. So we will have presentations by water.org, CEPT, Unilever, and the Toilet Board Coalition, which will be followed by an open discussion on catalyzing more capital for this sector. This open discussion will be for about an hour, moderated by Karthik Desai from Desai and Associates and Mayappan from Trilegal, after which we have a focus group discussion. So we have 4 groups that we have made. One is of banks and financial institutions. Second is of venture capital and private equity firms. Third is of CSR and philanthropy. And fourth is of enabling enterprises. The idea is that all of you will discuss in your respective groups. So we have also written some topics and some questions are there with each of you. The idea is that for about half an hour, 40 minutes, you discuss and deliberate that. And then one person from the group will come and present the group's findings or observations and answer those questions that we have given. I also believe and realized when I was going around the table saying hi and hello to everyone that a few of you are attending IIC's event for the first time. So IIC is Impact Investors Council. Our task is to evangelize impact investing in the country, which essentially means to bring more capital into the impact investing space. Impact investing constitutes of investments in the underserved areas of health, education, water, livelihood, agri. I am myself from an agri background, got into this role recently about 4 or 5 months back, and it's been an interesting journey. The way IIC is structured is we are structured on what we currently call as 4 Ps, which is policy, programs, partnerships, and publications. I look after policy, and under policy we engage with policy makers and regulators like Reserve Bank of India, SEBI, and Ministry of Finance in Delhi. Programs is looked after by my colleague Ranjana Khanna, Senior Director. So what you are seeing today is a part of the work that Ranjana does, which is running these year-long programs on certain topics. We have done multiple programs, so blended finance is being done in collaboration with USAID. We are running a program on climate in collaboration with NEEF funds. We are also in talks with 1 or 2 agencies to run collaboration on, to run a program on gender lens investing. The third P is partnerships, which is looked after by my colleague Neha Bhatnagar, who is unfortunately a little under the weather today and not here. So under partnerships, we have these LPGP meetings. She's also tasked with expansion of the membership base of IIC. Publications and research is headed by Divya, who's somewhere here, and as the head of research. Under publications, we come out with reports, newsletters, and bulletins. Most of you may be receiving our monthly newsletter, which is Market Pulse, which also has something called a deal tracker, and interviews, which is quite popular amongst the recipients. Before I leave it to the sector specialists and practitioners to deliberate, I had few observations on blended finance and the way it has kind of developed in the country. So while this terminology is new, but blended finance did exist in the country in some form or the other. And in the good old days, it was called as viability gap funding, and largely limited to public infrastructure. So the private enterprise or the public enterprise would come in with the equity. The government would give debt at concessional rates, which is the priority sector lending rates. And the subsidy that would come in from the government side was the grant. In the agri sector, on which I have some experience, one of the examples was something called a mega food park project, which was run by the Ministry of Food Processing. So that is what blended finance was in the country. Now, fortunately, with the creation of certain enterprises like the blended finance company, it is getting mainstreamed and it is also getting gaining more traction. My observation is, or let us say my take on this has been that it perhaps needs to get much more formalized. And what has been happening is that structures are being created by donor organizations like IKEA or Rabo, of which I am aware of, and certain projects are being chosen. But then there needs to be an institution, and blended finance company certainly is one of them, wherein such structures can be taken, and the government can certainly play a part in creating those institutions, wherein certain entrepreneurs can go to that institution, and then certain structures can be created around that. Blended finance structure in WASH unfortunately have not been observed at scale compared to other sectors such as health, education, and wherein we have seen some more greater participation. And we also therefore need to institutionalize blended finance. I would now leave it, before leaving it to the sector specialists, I would like to invite Mark from USAID to deliver his keynote. Thank you.
Thanks, Girish. Before I start, just a small tip for folks who might be getting to be around my age. If you don't want to start your day feeling old, don't leave your remarks on the dining table, because if you do, your daughter might say, "Hey, Dad, why is the font size so huge?" So anyway, that's how my day started. It's really a pleasure to be with all of you this morning representing the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID. Full disclosure to all of you, I'm neither an expert in WASH nor in blended finance, so I'm expecting to learn a lot more from you than you from me. But that being said, since I was asked to make some remarks, you get to listen to me for a few minutes. I want to start by thanking IIC for organizing this workshop. USAID is a proud supporter of the India Blended Finance Collaborative. And this exciting initiative, which is working to accelerate and mainstream the use of blended finance in India through access to curated knowledge, resources, and relevant networks, especially in sectors like WASH, where the flow of private capital has been a challenge traditionally. As the WASH practitioners in the room know, globally, lack of access to safe and sustainable WASH services is a massive problem. Over 2 billion people worldwide lack safely managed drinking water at home. Around 3.5 billion people worldwide lack access to safely managed sanitation. And around 2 billion lack a basic hand washing facility at home. And I don't need to tell you how important access to WASH services is when it comes to health, malnutrition, productivity, economic growth, and more. What I do want to highlight, though, is the importance of the private sector in addressing this global problem. First, the scale of the problem is far too large for the public sector to address on its own. No matter how much funding is provided by governments, and I do want to acknowledge the significant level of funding that the government of India has put into WASH over the past decade and the changes that have been happening, it will still not be enough to address the needs. However, it is not just about finding the funding. There are critical needs for the private sector to be involved all along the value chain, building the infrastructure, developing the products and innovations that the sector needs, delivering the services, and much, much more. Last year, the US government launched its US Global Water Strategy that advances its vision of a water-secure world through sustainable and equitable water resources management and improved access to safe drinking water, sanitation services, and hygiene practices. The Global Water Strategy recognizes the important role that the private sector plays in creating and financing durable, scalable solutions to WASH challenges. Private investment of all types into the sector is essential, and in fact, the private sector is becoming increasingly an important part of the solution to WASH challenges. However, since this event is about finance, let's focus on that. In the WASH sector, the primary source of financing is still public. And as I mentioned before, bridging the financing gap in the WASH sector requires expanded utilization of private finance. However, private capital providers face challenges. These include a high degree of perceived risk, incomplete market information, low capacity in the sector, a very high dependence on government receivables, oftentimes a lack of business models that are considered to be bankable, and more generally, a lack of a robust enabling environment. This is where organizations such as USAID can play a role. We can use our grants, technical expertise, and convening abilities to help de-risk and catalyze private investment. USAID has traditionally deployed the following strategies to engage the private sector in tackling development challenges. We engage, share information, and identify shared value to all stakeholders. We can harness private sector expertise and innovation through these conversations and through our activities. We can help catalyze private sector resources. And finally, we can work to help strengthen the enabling environment by engaging on issues important to the private sector, such as regulatory reform, policy, compliance, and government capacity building. In WASH, there are a few areas which we feel are critical in making WASH enterprises investable. The first, enterprise capacity development. Through business advisory services to improve sales, marketing, vendor management, working capital management, and so on, we can improve internal processes such as accounting, navigating the government procurement systems, etc. Investor education. Educating investors on the larger WASH landscape and the different types of business models operating in water and sanitation. One of the reasons why we have WASH experts in the room. And creating matchmaking platforms to bring funders, investors together with enterprises, such as what we're doing today. Improving the enabling environment for private enterprises in sanitation through collaboration with the Government of India and with state governments. By improving the capacity of municipal officials for private sector engagement, working on more efficient procurement processes, improving the financial health of municipalities, and ensuring timely approvals for infrastructure projects, to name a few. For more than 10 years, USAID has worked hand in hand with India's vibrant private sector to mobilize investments for scaling and developing sustainable market-based WASH solutions. We support startup challenges and incubator and accelerator programs to encourage entrepreneurship and to strengthen and scale promising enterprises. We've used partial credit guarantee programs to help de-risk commercial lending, coupled with technical assistance. These are guarantees in which USAID covers up to 50% of the loss to help lenders become more familiar with the sector and improve the overall risk profile of the portfolio. We support investor landscape studies to help potential investors assess opportunities and challenges in the sector. And we are always looking for new and better ways to share information and best practices and for partnership opportunities to deepen our collaboration with the private sector. As I mentioned earlier, USAID uses many different strategies to encourage private sector investment in the WASH sector. And one of the ways we are looking to explore more is, according to the topic today, blended finance, and looking at more blended finance tools that might be better suited for certain types of WASH enterprises. And that is why I'm so excited about the event today and why I'm hoping to learn a lot more and looking forward to conversations and engagements that this event will spark. So thank you again for inviting me here today to be part of this discussion.
And now I'd like to invite Sajid Amit, who's the Executive Director, South Asia for Water.org, for his lightning keynote.
Hi, everyone. So let me just first say what a great pleasure it is to be here. Do I sound right, or am I sounding tinny? Maybe I'm just sounding tinny to myself. So yeah, thank you for turning up. This, of course, is a very important event for us. And a lot of you will have come across our name and what we do, but for those of you who might not be as acquainted, just to sort of paint a picture with very broad strokes in terms of what Water.org does globally and in India. So we have been in existence for about 25 years. One of our founders is rather famous, Matt Damon of Hollywood fame. Our other founder is equally effective and, of course, famous within the circles, Gary White. So we began with the vision of trying to take what microcredit was famous for in providing small microloans. Microcredit, of course, has done this for income-generating activities, right? That was what microcredit has been known for. We took this model, we figured out that, poor people are still paying a lot of money to get water. In some countries, they were paying up to $60 a month to get access to water. And of course, there's travel involved, there's a big demand on their time involved, etc. So we hypothesized that this problem can be solved through a mixture of technical assistance to MFIs, and thus started our journey. It's been 25 years. We have reached about 52 to 60 million people globally, of which the growth engine has been India. So we have reached about 25 million people in India alone, mobilized over $2 billion worth of capital through microfinance institutions and SHPIs. And increasingly, our portfolio has broadened. Now we work with SMEs. We have very adept partners who work with us in SMEs. We have a large sort of ambit of SMEs that we're working with, water and sanitation SMEs. Our goal with the SMEs has been to provide them technical assistance and make them investable and help them access capital. So we sort of occupy this niche of enabling capital mobilization is what we call it, or capital facilitation, or in some cases capital investments. Beyond all this, if I take a step back, we also work with impact investors, and in a growing and significant way. We have a sister concern called Water Equity that might be known to a lot of you. Water Equity and Water.org share the same founders and the same CEO. So essentially, Water Equity has made significant investments in India itself. Water Equity is not our only partner in India. We work very closely with NAP Samriddhi, Bonani ma'am is right here, and a few others, DBS, etc. And so we have a growing portfolio. We have clocked about 50 million worth of investments every year, but it's just the beginning stage of this particular product that we're trying to grow in this market. So we welcome this opportunity to network with all of you, to get ideas and feedback from all of you, make connections, friendships perhaps, alliances for sure, and find ways to work together for this wonderful initiative, because we do think blended financing is the way in which impact investments will be successful in our part of the world. You need capital to de-risk. You need capital to orient the marketplace at large. And with that, I'd like to thank IIC once again, and USAID, of course, for supporting this. Thank you.
Thanks, Sajid. And I'll just take a couple of minutes here just to let you all know why we are all together here. So under India Blended Finance Collaborative now, for the past couple of years, I think it's close to 2 years since we are holding such peer learning sectoral sessions, where our main objective has been to talk to the practitioners, coming to understand what all is happening in the market, what kind of transactions, who's doing what, how can we actually increase the scale in some of these transactions, especially looking at it from the blended finance perspective. But so far, we've done these sessions for sectors like healthcare, healthcare, agriculture. We've done on technology for development and climate. Now, WASH as a sector is inherently very, very different and very special for us in that respect, because a couple of things. I think one is that in all the other sectors, you already see the private capital there, with or without blended finance. But that's not the case with WASH. Like globally also we see that, of all the private capital deployed towards WASH, through blended finance, WASH gets like a puny 1 to 2%, which intrigued us more. So that was reason number one for us to do a session around WASH. And secondly, if you study structures also across globally, we see that, the typical structures are very similar to the ones in other sectors. You see guarantee structures, you see technical assistance kind of structures, and you see credit enhancement and some of the other structures which exist in other sectors as well. But what intrigued us more was that, this being a sector which is so much supported by the public finance, ideally you should see more of, outcomes-based financing. But whatever we could found, and honestly, and I think that is our topmost reason for diving deeper into this, was also that, whatever we could find around, say, outcome-based financing was largely originated from India only. So you have the brain behind of all the interesting transactions. You said that much more is the potential to do more within the Indian ecosystem. And lastly, what we also realized that if we have to do anything in the blended finance and for WASH, so this is the ecosystem, whatever is there in this room, so it cannot go outside that. So you have the brains behind, you have the facilitators, you have the capital, so everybody is here in the room today, and our objective as a facilitator is to promote and engage these conversations so that more ideas are shared and more transactions are discussed. And finally, with the help of these, if we are able to scale some of these transactions going forward, I think that would be a win for us as IBFC and as IIC. So for today's session, a big thank you to water.org. They have helped us curate, think through this entire thing, how we should put this together, because we are not sector experts. So we are facilitators. We bring all the people together. We, make these conversations happen. But yes, I think our role stops there. And that's for the industry to do. And I'd like to congratulate the entire industry. We are hearing some really interesting stuff of what kind of transactions are happening. But yes, we are greedy, we need more. So today's objective is to, do more. How can we facilitate some of these conversations so that we see more transactions going forward? And on this note, I'd like to hand it over to Divya to take the conversation ahead. Thank you.
Morning to all of you. So everybody's alluded to the challenges that exist in WASH. A quick snapshot as to what really does this sector constitute. We have water supply, we have sanitation, we have hygiene. So there's enough and more to be discussed and implemented in these spaces. Yet what we came across while we were researching on this sector was that a minuscule amount of the total climate finance transactions, which is a very closely interlinked segment, happens to this space. So there's enough and more potential for capital to flow in. Yet there are certain challenges which are generally perceived to be associated with this space. The lack of commercially scalable and viable business models, something which could be implemented and mainstreamed across spaces. The absence of impact measurement frameworks which could be adapted to what the WASH segment is specific towards. Like Mark earlier mentioned that, most of these projects require the involvement of the public finance players. There is municipal corporations involved. That results into a lot of complexity when it comes to implementation on ground. And of course, the fact that there is a very strong socio-economic context, the involvement of community, spreading awareness, knowledge dissemination, all of these make this a very peculiar and a slightly challenging space to maneuver. Having said that, we have come across different kinds of financing approaches. Now, what you see on screen are not necessarily blended by themselves, but probably putting them together, one could come across a blended finance structure. Right from microfinance loans towards WASH assets, especially which have been happening in small tier locations, to major public-private partnership structures wherein you see two different forms of capital coming together to be able to create outcome-based impact on ground, to the strong impact that philanthropies and CSR players could bring in by giving grant financing, technical assistance to projects, as well as bringing a very strong community engagement. And lastly, a very strong emerging space which we have been encountering, the coming up of innovative startups. How technology is playing a stronger role when it comes to, say, clean water supply, water sanitation, sewage water management, and so on. Now, what we are really trying to attempt through these conversations is how can all these different aspects of financing be possibly pooled together and made into a blended finance structure. So before we progress into the discussion, what we'll be having next is a demonstration of case studies. Practitioners who in this space have played a strong role with certain transactions which we'd like to understand from. What I'll just kind of mention here is that we'll be having a set of case study discussions. So I'll request you all to just hold on to the points or the questions that you all might have, which you all would like to pose to them going ahead. We are going to be having a dedicated audience Q&A and an open discussion soon. So that's when, just in the paucity of time, we'll take that up. So to start off the first case study discussion, we have Sudhir Arya, Director, Financial Institution Partnerships, South Asia at water.org, to share more about their water credit model.
Once again, everyone. And so nice to see all the stakeholders in the room. And, when talking about like how all stakeholders are coming together to solve this problem, I remember one of the clip I saw in the Stockholm World Water Week. That was the hummingbird was, trying to save the forest. Everyone knows that tale. But what I see is we have elephants, hummingbirds, tiger, lions. Everybody is in the room. So definitely, I see a positive, a future for all of us to solve this problem. And maybe a lot of people who loves numbers. So let me throw some numbers. These are sad numbers, but let me start with that. 1 million plus people die every year because of lack of water and sanitation. And if I go further to the children, every 2 minutes while we are talking, one child dies because of the lack of water and sanitation. And so these are some of the health numbers, and if we add the economic numbers into it, so almost $260 billion what we lost each year, again because of lack of water and sanitation. So how can we solve this problem? Because philanthropy is a great way, no doubt, like as I mentioned, like we need everybody in the room to solve this problem together. But the gap is huge, and that's where Water.org, being a not-for-profit organization, but we believe in catalyzing the capital for the larger cause. $114 billion is what needed to solve the SDG 6 problem, and what we have, 1/3 of it. So that's where we came into the picture and see like how we can unlock this capital. And Mark already, and in fact Ranjana also talked about the public finance. So as of now, if we look at the overall SDG 6 or the sector, 78% of the capital as of now is being supplied by the public sector. But the good news is for the people who comes from the private sector, this number is going to fall to 43% within a decade. And these stats came from Global Water Intelligence. So there is a huge scope, there is opportunity, so we can together work on this to achieve within our lifetime a day when everyone have water and sanitation access. So let me already Sajid talked about the Water.org, but we are global not-for-profit organization, and we try to catalyze and try to break the barriers, the financial barriers for the people. We aim to catalyze the blended terms of private and public finance to enable at the household level, so people should have the access, and at the same time for the entire supply chain where the SMEs are playing, where the infrastructure companies are playing, so everybody should have that access. With that, let me talk about our model, that is water credit model. And Matt Damon and Gary White, who were the co-founders of Water.org, they came together, and the model was experimented, and then came up with a model that is water credit, where utilizing of the micro loans for giving the access of water and sanitation, especially at the base of the economic pyramid. So if I explain this, I know like we have another 2 or 3 minutes left, so I'll try to summarize it. Like Water.org, we provide the technical assistance to the microfinance institutions, and this technical assistance can be market assessment. This is providing the trainings, collaterals, and utilization, impact assessments. So overall, what we are trying to do, we are also trying to de-risk their investment. We are trying to de-risk the overall portfolio, so they do have an opportunity to invest in this space, and at the same time getting the better results. What Sajid talked about, the $2 billion plus investments, and I'm happy to share the repayment rate is close to 99%. So we being a not-for-profit, but still we believe the sustainability will come if you have the right mix of the portfolio and the portfolio quality is good. So this technical assistance, we support microfinance institutions, and hence microfinance institutions, they lend to the household. And the repayment rate, as I mentioned, because the people at the base of the economic pyramid, and this is not a new phenomena, because if you look at the microfinance, overall microfinance rates are close to 99%. And when it comes on a water and sanitation assets, when they see that has been built in their house and how they are helping their day-to-day lives, that even sometimes it goes 20-30 bips point more than the regular microfinance repayment rates. What we realized over the period of time, like we need to work with the overall ecosystem. So one part we try to solve at the household level, but how should we work with the government? How should we work with the utilities? How should we work with the SMEs? Because now we all can say like the SMEs are the growth engine for the economy. So we have partnered with a couple of institutions in that space. ESCI is one. I'm sure Professor Chari could not come today, the Administrative Staff College of India. So we are trying to solve that problem, ease of doing business, ease of finance, so that they can have both the things together, and then they can serve the country better. Then now what we are trying to do is supporting the water utilities in terms of the pilot, in terms of how they should access the finance. And I think when we talked about the public finance, and it's a great way to, bring the municipal corporation bond, for example, and 30 to 40% of those bonds have been utilized for water and sanitation purposes. So we are working with a couple of potential partners, including SBI CAP and others. How can we mobilize more capital in this space? So within water credit, the first part I covered for the microfinance institutions. The second part is, while we are working with these utilities, so these are mainly through the SMEs, through the EPCs, how can we support them from the technical aspects, and at the same time, how can we support them on their pilots so that this can become a scalable? Because scalability is something that is really important to bridge this gap, where we are talking about, $114 billion, what we have available is $28 billion. So just to bridge that gap, definitely we need a scalable solutions. And we always believe in the sustainability, and we do have our own exit policies like any, other impact investors. So we support the institutions 3 to 5 years in the range, then we make them graduated in our own internal, terminology, so that they can be sustainable in providing their own solutions. It should become a part of their own solution, not water.org solution. So overall, with the ecosystem, with the central government, with state governments, how we are trying to support them through the SRLMs, through SHG models, through, for example, GUDM is one of our partner, Gujarat Urban Development Mission, who are supporting the overall, utilities work. So we will request to the room, let's, enable these SMEs, these EPCs with the, better capital equipped. Some of them are at the startup growth phase. They need the capital to scale their own solutions. So we have the almost another 2.5 hours where we can talk more. How can we collaborate? But we'll welcome sessions.
Thank you, Sudhir. We now move on to the next discussion. We have with us an organization that has been doing a lot of work on ground, and from them we'd like to learn about how implementation of such projects can actually come about. I'd like to invite Mr. Dinesh Mehta, Professor Emeritus and Head, Center for Water and Sanitation, to speak about the work that they do.
Thank you. And there are many familiar faces here, and many of you probably know my colleague Meera Mehta more because she worked with the World Bank and on financing more than me, but we've been dabbling in this space for last 10 years. I just want to say, water.org, we have been partners, Vedika, Manoj, and sanitation credit is something we did in Jalna along with your partnership, so we are also there. Now, just a background, while we come from a university and we teach courses on urban finance and financing development, when we started to work, we have this Center for Water and Sanitation, and we're working in this space for the last 10 years. Our core geography is Maharashtra right now, where we support the state government to implement the Swachh Bharat mission in the state, and we have about 10 cities where we have teams sitting there innovating things and doing all kinds of activities. And some of the case studies, Y and Sinner, that we keep talking about have been taken up at national and international scale. So we realize that our academic work needs to be informed by what we do on practice. And so we've been dabbling in this space. And I must say, thanks for this opportunity. For the last 4 years, LM is here, Mayappan is here. We talked about a sanitation impact bond. We still are there where we were. So I hope that end of this meeting, there is greater conversation with us and we can move that needle a bit more forward. There are lots of impact investors. We are worried about outcome payers and where they are. I see USAID, I saw BMGF, and we've been talking to a lot of outcome payers, but that is where our challenge has been. So just to go back to this slide, if we are talking about blended finance in the space of sanitation, there's a whole service chain in which we can talk about it. I mean, typically one looks at the whole, that there is only a utility. This is the model. But we feel that, you know, you can start from the toilet access, where, as I said, we did work with water.org in the city of Jalna. In fact, that was water.org typically worked in rural areas. So we said that come to urban areas. That is something we know. And in the city of Jalna, over 300 families actually received credit in addition to the government subsidies that were available under Swachh Bharat. So that was a real blended finance that happened. What I'll talk a little more in the next slide is about what we call the PLAM model, the performance linked annuity model, or what the World Bank will call P4R, the performance results and payment for results. Sujata, I saw, is here, and we talk about municipal bond from the days of the USAID fire project. And so those are the other activities that are available for the investors and for the space. And finally, in terms of the, what I think you talked about, the climate finance, and there is a lot more opportunities these days on the reuse of wastewater, and there is a great focus of, so how do we create activities and projects around that? Now, as I said, that except for this one PLAM model, we have not been greatly successful in our work in terms of mobilizing private capital. So we've been using grant funds, we've been using CSR funds and other funding for our activities. But I think across this sanitation space, there is a great scope for various investors. We can go to the next slide. And so just a brief on this. As an organization, we took a conscious decision that whenever we talk about urban projects, people always think of Bangalore, Mumbai, Delhi. Nobody talks about small towns. So as consciously we picked up small towns in Maharashtra. The two cities that we picked, Y is only 40,000 population. Sinnar, which is near Nashik, is 70,000, 80,000 now, but rapidly growing. So we said that let us work with these cities and demonstrate what we can do. So the first challenge that we had was to make sure, and these are non-sewered cities, which means that there is no sewerage system. Everybody has a septic tank or a pit. Because the private pit emptier charges somewhere between 3,000 to 5,000 rupees. Nobody empties their pit unless it is overflowing, and therefore all the chaos and the neighbor complain, and then only they do. We said that we will not do this. We will have what is known as a scheduled desludging. And we said if this municipal council or a city authority picks up garbage every year from your, and it is paid out of tax, why not empty a pit or a septic tank every 2 years, 3 years on a cycle, and again pay it out of a tax. And so we started to talk about this scheduled desludging linked to sanitation tax. And the way the model works is that there is a scheduled private enterprise that brings their own capital, the trucks, etc. So it's a small capital. I mean, 2 trucks, 3 trucks, each truck cost about 25L, so total 1 CR investment. They bid for a minimum price per emptying, and the lowest bidder based on all these things is chosen, and then the amount that is bid is actually worked out as a part of the property tax. So sanitation tax is just added on to the property tax. And because the private sector, when you deal with the government, always has the problem that, look, what's the payment risk? So we created an escrow account with the bank and said that, okay, the 3-month payable will be with the bank, and so the private, that's the cushion comfort that they have. We were wondering whether the model will work or not. In Y, we finished one cycle of 3 years where we were totally hands-on and doing even contracting, procurement, support, everything. The second cycle, which started a year ago, they did it on their own without any support from us, and they've done that, and it's working. In Sinnar again, the other city, where the first cycle is just getting over, and they will do the second cycle. What is needed is that we need to look at the entire service chain. And our standard model of when we reached out to the municipal authority was that the Swachh Bharat mission is doing wonderful things about building toilet. But toilet ke baad kya? I mean, what happens beyond toilet, and how do we actually do this entire service chain? And just to complete the story, I mean, we can talk a little more about it. This has been documented, the WHO's blended finance book and very many other places. We are now working at on the climate front. How can we prepare? So reuse, energy transition from all these sewage treatment plants or the fecal sludge treatment plants. So in the 3-4 cities where we are working, we are now getting into solar energy. We are actually negotiating with the truck operator to come up with an electric desludging vehicle. So there is, I think, as somebody said, that the scope is enormous in this sector. Only thing is, we can start small. We are happy to work with you in starting small, and then we can scale it up, because there are 8,000 cities in the country without sewer system, and they need this support. These are the cities where and thank you for this opportunity.
Hope, like everybody said, these are the starting point of many conversations to happen. Sir spoke about the role that grant capital plays, and that's what we'd like to explore further, how CSR can play a very strong role in furthering these projects. We have with us the Unilever team. I'd like to invite Sandeep Sheth, Manager Sustainability from Unilever, to come on stage and speak about the project Suvidha.
So currently we have 15 Suvidha centers in Mumbai. So the model is that we've created we work very closely in partnership with the Municipal Corporation of Mumbai. We demolish the existing toilet block, construct a Suvidha center which has essentially 4 services for the community. The first service is toilet. We have a separate toilet area for men, separate toilet area for women. We have a specially abled toilet. We have a third gender toilet for men, women. And then we have laundry service for the community. We have drinking water service for the community, and we have a bathing service for the community. Now this is right in the heart of the slum or the informal settlement in Mumbai. If you look at the model, it is designed very inclusively, keeping in mind women's safety. We have CCTV cameras everywhere. We have a panic button. We have it is very well lit at night, so it's a kind of a community center. Then we have separate entrance area for men, women, and drinking water, the safe drinking water service for the community. The idea is to create a one-stop wash solution for the community right inside the community's heart. So this is not on the main road at the congregation point or at the highways. This is right in the center of the community. If you can go to the first slide, you will see the location where we are on the, this is the Suvidha Center in Dharavi, where we are right now, right inside the community. So this model is designed in a way we have government who provides us with the land and all the necessary approvals. Unilever, HSBC and JSW, we co-fund this project from our CSR initiative. United Way, Pratha are our NGO partners and the operations partner. and we have our technical partner EY does all our audits and the governance work for us. Yeah, so at this point, the impact is we currently have 16 Suvidha centers providing an access to about 420,000 people. We've saved, we have a water treatment or a grey water treatment plant also at the center. We're saving about we've saved about 120 million liters of water. We have provided access to sanitation, or the people, number of times the services have been used is more than 30 million times. And now at this point of time, every month we are providing service for about 1.5 million times to the community in the slum. We've done laundry loads for about 700,000 times. 600,000 people have been trained. This is the impact slide. Now the reduction in diarrhea incidents among the Suvidha center is 44%, which makes us really happy. 90% of the users believe Suvidha has a positive impact on their self-esteem. Imagine a day starting, if you're living in an informal settlement, you have to really travel to use your toilet. You don't have a toilet at home. You have to travel to use your toilet, and then you find a toilet which is really in a dirty condition. You don't have water at the toilet. It is a direct impact on a self-esteem and then the mental health also. So that is another impact what we really are happy about. Now, this is a self-sustaining operational model. The capex comes from the CSR initiative, but the centers are chargeable and are extremely economical what we charge. The prices are like 150 rupees for the entire family of 5 for the entire month, which eventually comes up to 1 rupee per day, but that helps the center to sustain on its own. Also, when we talk about the model, the challenge what normally a community toilet blocks have are they are a community or a public toilet, they are into a vicious cycle. They are not able to generate enough revenue, then they are not able to maintain it properly, then it goes into a vandalism mode, and then again they are not able to generate or maintain that center, and that is the biggest challenge. The capex is still a challenge which can be integrated with the people here in the meeting room, but the bigger challenge is actually the operations of this community centers. We've managed to create a model which is operationally self-sustainable also. With the 65% women running our centers, the 35% men are actually at the toilet cleaning area for the men's section. We are paying really fair and livable wages to the community. Repeated trainings have been done with the communities and with the employees of the center. Yeah, so that's about it for the timing. If you have any questions, I'm just around and feel free to ask. Yeah, we're playing the AV for your reference, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Sandeep. Extremely inspiring to hear about the work that CSR can propel in this space. Like we've been speaking about safe sanitation and the projects that can happen in this area, there's one organization who has been championing this space and what could be those models which can work on a sustainable basis for long. We have with us Venugopal Gupta, Managing Director Acceleration with the Toilet Boat Coalition, who will be sharing some of his insights from the past projects that they've undertaken.
So hi everyone. As many of you might know, we run the world's largest accelerator program for sanitation entrepreneurs. Is this better? Still not better, okay. Okay, thank you. So we run the world's largest accelerator program for sanitation entrepreneurs. We worked with over 87 entrepreneurs. I can see some of them here as well. Over the last 7 years. And so I wanted to present some learnings from our work. What is it that the SMEs who are bringing innovative business solutions to the sanitation sector, what is it they want in terms of capital, in terms of where they want to apply the funding that they receive from investors. The broad learning over the last 6 years has been that we need not just more funding, but we need more diverse funding in the sector. And so I'm just going to make a few important points here in terms of what the SMEs require. We usually work with SMEs along their evolution from the prototype stage to the early revenue, deliberate revenue, pre-scale, scaling stage. And the important point which we've seen is a kind of make or break point in the evolution of an SME is the sort of deliberate revenue to pre-scale stage. There's a lot of funding available from the sort of early stage, prototype stage. But there's not a lot of capital that's supporting the deliberate revenue and the pre-scale stage. When I say deliberate revenue, this is the time when SMEs are not sort of experimenting with getting new customers, but they are putting in place systems and processes that can deliver new customers to them through a systematic marketing plan or similar things. And so they need investment to build their team. They need investments to evolve the products that they are creating. As you know, sanitation is very asset intensive, right from toilets to treatment to waste to value. It requires some asset, that's going to run the operation and then operations of those assets. And so along this evolution, we see not only the SME operations evolving, we see the asset evolving as well. Some of the first assets are being created in the lab, but the subsequent assets need to be ready for contract manufacturing or mass manufacturing kind of operation as well. The other thing we see is on the team side. The team usually is very small in the earlier stages, but then it needs to bring in more functions. There's a marketing team that gets developed. There's a finance team that gets developed. And so we need more risk capital there that can support hiring of new functional teams. So if you look at the type of capital that we are observing, at the prototype and early revenue stage, we see a predominance of seed capital and grant capital. And then as the SMEs evolve, that is where we see that, it really needs, more diverse kind of capital availability. So a couple of things that we observe in terms of finance availability during this stage of deliberate revenue and pre-scale is the catalytic grant, which is a grant, I'm sure you're all aware, but which is a grant that also takes into account business model strengthening of the SME, not just social impact, but social impact through business model strengthening. We see, of course, the sort of regular debt in the form of a term loan, 3-year, 5-year kind of debt. We see little equity. We need more risk capital equity. Very difficult for an SME to build teams with debt on a very small capital structure. Then working capital, I think there is reasonable availability of working capital. When I say reasonable, I remember Sudhir's words that, reasonable in the relative sense of what sanitation gets in terms of finance. And then asset financing, I think, is something that we still feel like there are a few steps needed when the core sanitation assets can be bankable and therefore financeable readily for scale up. And then asset management. I mean, if we look at the infrastructure sectors, if we look at the utility sectors globally, the long-term ownership of those assets is separated from the operations of those assets. So there are companies that are operating the assets, but they are not necessarily holding those assets long term, and which gives them a lot of breadth, a lot of bandwidth to increase the operations of the assets and not worry every time about capital being deployed in developing and stabilizing assets. So we took some initial steps in 2020-21 to set up an asset management structure. It's making some initial investments right now, but we're very keen to see that get scaled up. I think it's something that that's needed. Simply because, I mean, if you look at the toilet asset, if you look at the treatment asset, and you know, try to finance that 15-year asset with a 3-year loan or a 5-year loan, it's really going to stress the P&L of any SME. And so we want to make sure that you know, the asset management structures are in place like they are in place for other asset-intensive industries. And then outcome funding, which is, I think, slightly more sort of aligned to the discussion here today. Not all pockets of the sanitation value chain are currently exhibiting a very strong sort of spontaneous organic revenue. And what is needed is a kind of spurring of that latent revenue, and outcome funding can go a long way in sort of bringing that implicit revenue out. And here we've started exploring some projects in this space as well, and we feel that there is a role for technology here also. I mean, if there is a way for us to attach a monetary value, like Sandeep talked about the Suvidha Center, I mean, if there is a way for us to attach a monetary value to the impact of one family getting safe sanitation per month, and that value is, let's say, X, then all we need is, through a technology platform, relaying that impact to an outcome funder on a philanthropy organization, etc., that can then attach that value and then you know, bring those outcome funding norms. And over time, I think this is something I guess you must be seeing in your centers as well, is that this need not continue ad infinitum. You know, over time, the ability to pay, people's ability to pay will increase, and therefore we need some sort of you know, middle sort of solution to get to that stage where revenue can be realized accordingly. And not just you know, diverse capital, we see a kind of bottleneck in this stage as well. We typically see a reasonable capital in the sub $100,000 range, between the $100,000 and the $500,000 range. We see capital there, but really it's in the $500,000 to $2 million range where we see you know, capital not being there. And it's quite understandable, because if you take a normal fund, you know, it would make, let's say, 10 or 12 investments during its lifetime. And so we are talking of a very small capital pool when we talk about ticket sizes of $1 million average, which means the funding pool needs to be $10 million or $12 million. And I think many of you would agree that small funding pools are unviable to manage. Investors find it very hard to manage funding pools over the sort of thin management fees that they receive. So the overall conclusion that I wanted to share is that you know, it's not just about more capital in the sector. I think we need more diverse kinds of capital. Toilets might need you know, different kinds of capital than treatment plants. Waste to value might require a different kind of capital structure. And we need to get over this sort of viability gap almost, even on the financing side. So maybe there is time to think of some of these financial pools which are suboptimal right now. So a $10 million, $12 million pool. Maybe it's time for us to think of these small pools as being unviable sanitation businesses in themselves, you know, which require some support to have them operate at scale. So that's the sort of, you know, I wanted to share these learnings over the past couple of years with you, and really looking forward to the discussion following this. And I hope that, you know, we can populate this sort of middle space with more and diverse kinds of capital. Thank you.
We've seen through the case studies, how, like Benu mentioned, different forms of or different pools of capital can actually come together. There is a lot more work which has happened in this space. In the interest of time, we might not be able to go through all the case studies. We'll definitely share the deck with you. But there's one that kind of ties together all these aspects about how cash flows can come in, how could wash assets be monetized, and how could a self-sustaining model be coming up. We have USAID in the room. Through the support of a catalytic guarantee that came in from USAID, we see how institutional investors, the state government, and the local municipal corporations have all participated in creating a fund which in turn can help manage all these different aspects of WASH. Now, can something like this be replicated at scale? We understand is a fairly tricky place, which we hope to understand as the discussion progresses. We have Maya in the room from Trilegal, who will be explaining how these bonds can actually be structured. So more such case studies are there. We acknowledge that all of them may not necessarily be purely blended in nature as you see them today. What really remains to be seen is how could they be probably brought in together into a complete time frame, into a similar structure, which then can be called blended. So we'll be sharing the deck with you, and what we hope to now understand is what are some of the learnings that practitioners from this space have seen, what are the kind of challenges which you all have been facing, and how could the ecosystem actually come together to be able to address them. So for that, we'd like to now invite on stage Karthik Desai, the founder and CEO of Desai and Associates, who will be sharing the compendium of learnings that the organization has put together from their work in WASH. This will be followed by Maya from Trilegal, who will be sharing the complete regulatory and policy angle to be actually managing and structuring these kind of transactions.
About imposter syndrome, and I'm really feeling that today because we are a generalized blended finance and innovative finance research advisory and market building firm and don't have any particular deep sector expertise in this. But over the course of the last 3 to 4 months, on behalf of USAID, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, KPMG, and AVPN, we carried out a very interesting study of over 15 different investors who are actively looking at the WASH space, specifically to understand what the challenges have been and what can be feedback given to urban local bodies, and how do we unlock blended finance structures. So I'm going to just very, very briefly to share what some of those findings were, but I think the real meat of the material has already been covered, and what Maya is going to speak about the regulatory structures that can be used to address these issues. And then I think we're going to have an open roundtable discussion to facilitate the views of folks in this room. So, sorry, this way. So the first point is that investors are interested in this space. They do see opportunities. I've before DNA been an impact investor for about 20 years, and seen the evolution of the space, the pessimism that investors carried, and how that has changed. They are looking to support technological innovation. They are looking obviously for scale and open to investing in tier 2 cities. One of the investments that had been made by my previous firm where I was involved was in a waste management company called NEPRA. If you guys are familiar with that, that's an example of a company that has scaled in tier 2 cities like Ahmedabad and Indore. And there are two sets of key concerns remain on this fact that the procurement, that the buyer is the government and the payer is the government, and also this policy divergence between different sets of geographies. So the fact remains, that the estimates for this are as high as 1.4 trillion is what we read somewhere at a global level to meet SDG 6. And that capital can only come in through the private sector, and it is struggling to come in. So what is the reason for that? Just before we come to the challenges, this is one of the things that we saw, which is there are now newer segments that investors are looking at. This study looked at 3 broad areas. The first was sanitation, which was defined as building and operating community toilets, desludging vehicles, public toilets, or what we can call aspirational toilets, mechanization, and worker safety. So these were the areas that the investors identified as being most interesting for them. The second segment was used water treatment, which included FSM, the STPs, industrial effluent plants, and reuse of treated wastewater. And then some people disagree with this, but we added solid waste management as the third vertical because investors do continue to remain interested in that. And there we looked at waste collection, dry, wet recycling, hazardous waste, mechanization of equipment, and landfill management. So this is a pretty detailed report, and it can be made available to everyone. Here we're just sort of introducing the basic ideas behind it. And I also want to thank the 15 plus investors who participated in this study. So what were the challenges? So as you can see, the main challenges when we asked them what are the strategic imperatives that really need to be focused on are all pretty much relating to their engagement with the ULBs. Transparency in tendering, so how can we standardize the processes a bit better for that? The payment consistency issue, and there many of them suggested can we somehow, rate the ULBs and give them a performance rating, and on the basis of that, it becomes easier for investors to engage, to avoid these payment delays and changes in the regulatory structure. And again, this issue of policy divergence between states. Now, it's interesting to note, and KPMG team is here, which is engaging with Mahua, that this ask actually came from Mahua, and it came from the ULB leaders, because they are also aware that in order to meet their Swachh Bharat targets, they need private investment. So wo khud pooch rahe hain that what can we do as ULBs to make situation better? And I think we need to go beyond these generalities and give them, very specific inputs. This study didn't get into that, and maybe that's one of the questions for all of you, is what would be like the wish list of specific actions that can be taken. And finally, just to conclude, in terms of the limitations of these instruments, there's definitely a need for equity, right? And equity is coming in. But we did, again, a very detailed mapping, and the report talks about this, of what are the 7 or 8 things that equity investors look for. So here's what the top 5 were. The first one they said was sufficient customer base, that there has to be an adequate market of paying customers. That says paying customer base. And then related to that is the second point, which was the ARPU, which is the average revenue per unit, that how much is each customer willing to pay relative to the overhead cost and the business development cost and the collection risk cost of servicing that customer. Third, these are investors, so this is what they're saying, limited competition. So at one level, when you have more activity happening in a sector, the more investors are willing to come in, but at the same time, they're open to investing in a space where there's limited competition. The product and services has to be highly differentiated and unique. And fifth, there has to be a clear market framework. So these were the concerns of equity investors. Debt investors actually built on top of this, and their first criteria was existing equity in the business. So equity is what brings in more debt. So they wanted that. Of course, they wanted profitability, which is a challenge because many of these projects remain small, subscale, and at the pilot level. And not just initial profitability, stable profitability and cash flows. That was the third criteria. And then again, clear market framework. There were like some 12 criteria that were presented to these investors. This one kept coming up. And then the fifth was good internal governance. So that all the compliances and all of the filings and all of those things are in place for these kind of enterprises. So, and I should also mention that people do appreciate that there's a significant role for the grants to play, both to seed these businesses and, of course, in the case of blended finance, to provide the concessional support that's needed. And then final point, and then Maya can help us deep dive into this. Some of these investors, about half of them, are looking at blended finance. And of course, we know broadly there's sort of 4 blended finance constructs that we can consider. And we try to sort of get a sense of the relevance of each, right? So the first one was, of course, grants. And of course, we heard from water.org about the fantastic work that they have been doing in enabling MFIs to provide sanitation loans through such grants, and generally the role that grants can play. On concessional capital, we came across a very interesting example of this Spring Health, which has been providing clean water in eastern India to villages. And generally, concessional capital is very, very helpful where you have some kind of capex involved for building toilets or for building waste treatment facilities. And of course, it's like impact-linked debt, so you can link the interest rate to the social outcomes. Risk mitigation, again, we have plenty of examples. For the USAID and DFC have partnered with impact NBFCs to unlock credit for WASH enterprises, and I'm sure we'll hear from others in the room in the discussion that's going to follow this as to other ways FLDGs and guarantees can be used. And finally, on results-based payments, right? We talk a lot about SIBs and DIBs, but there's also a lot of potential for bill discounting, and also this concept known as sinks, for those of you guys who are familiar with them, which is a social impact incentive, which is built on top of the financial performance. And we came across this pretty interesting example of Roots of Impact and Aqua for All, who are providing sink incentives. So these are for enterprises who are already doing their basic work in WASH, but if they achieve specific social outcomes in, let's say, meeting certain BOP customers or rural customers or women customers, then they're given an incentive. So a lot of opportunities for blended finance. And I just wanted to conclude and hand it over to Maya by just listing out and framing what I think what all of us collectively hopefully agree are the three big challenges in blended finance, and how do we address those with the various stakeholders who are in the room. The first are these transaction structures. There's so many transaction structures, right? And it's good that the market is moving in that way, but how do we simplify? How do we templatize? How do we reduce the time, structure, and cost? Because if you don't have that, it's going to remain very, very bespoke. And where are we stuck on those issues? Maybe Maya can speak on that, Nirav, and others in the room who are structuring transactions. Then maybe we have a couple of donors in the room, from Gates Foundation, from BII, from USAID, and other entities. The sheer lack or limited availability of outcome funding. And perhaps that's also related to the metricization of impact, right? Because ultimately outcome funders want impact. And if you can metricize it and give them clarity that this is exactly what's being achieved with the impact, they're willing to give the outcome funding. And then that overall point about reg issues beyond just transaction structures. What is really our ask of ULBs? Everyone just sticks to those basic points saying we don't want government as a procurer. ULBs need to, simplify tendering rules. What can be like an action agenda that an industry body like the IIC can actually take forward to ULBs, because they're certainly open to that feedback, beyond overall capital enablement regulation relaxations that we can talk about with SEBI, RBI, MOF, etc. What can we tell the ULBs to do? So to me, these would be the three sets of questions. So again, happy to make this report available via IIC to anyone who's here, and looking forward to the discussion ahead. And forgive me for the bad cold and cough. It's a viral season in Delhi. But over to Maya.
Karthik, thanks for having me here. And we've been working on structuring different blended finance products for over 7-8 years now. The legal, tax, and regulatory regime has changed significantly. Some aspects for the better, some for the worse, some we can't speak in public. So closed door setting is great in terms of also sharing this knowledge and the kind of experiences that other transactions and the benefit of having seen some things go through successfully. I think it's good for the wider market to also be aware of, knowing what is easy to achieve, and there are newer structures that we can kind of explore as well. So in this presentation, I have about 7 to 10 minutes. We can do a half day, full day workshop on this, because there are different practice areas we are trying to cover. There are different instruments. What I'm going to try and do over the next 5-7 minutes is to kind of quickly give an overview of what are the key regulations we need to keep an eye out for. The kind of work that we do cuts across multiple practice areas. Looking at the people in the room, you could have we work on instruments that are listed on the social stock exchange. That's with the capital markets practice. There could be impact funds, there could be impact bonds, there could be green bonds. So this is banking and finance. This is, the fund sector. So we do work across different teams internally as well, and this might be relevant in a different way for different forms of funders and those who are interested. So I'm just going to broadly say what we have, what kind of capital that is there, what is the practicalities or what you'll not find in the regulations, and how the practice has evolved, where we think is the best chances for kind of looking at new structures going forward and what's worth exploring. And there are some which are more high risk, there are some which are more low risk, and the risk appetite also makes a difference in terms of who wants to get into this. We will be making the deck available later, and there is a lot of material there. We will be skimming through a lot of it, but feel free to take a look and reach out later depending on what your interest is. So some of this people have already spoken about, so I'm skipping the few key regulations. So when we're talking about blended finance, right, the goal is to get in concessional capital or grant money which either de-risks the transaction or comes in with a lesser return seeking from a financial perspective, but more on the impact side. Now this poses 2-3 challenges. When we look at the sources of capital we have, which are looking at lesser returns and more impact, One pool of capital is CSR. The second is just philanthropic money in India, which is non-CSR. And the third is foreign philanthropic money, which comes through the FCRA route. Each of these are highly regulated. CSR works a certain way, and for you to be able to tap that money, I think compliance with respect to CSR regulations is key for any of the local funders you're talking about. The important part is that, you know, this has been they are talking about outcome financing and results-based financing, but the risk appetite is generally low. In-house counsel and you know, kind of, because the regulator has not been the most progressive, although they have made some changes over the last few years, which has helped thanks to the policy efforts of many people in the room and IIC. I think it's still not where we would ideally want it to be. So for example, whether outcome funding is possible, right? So we have come up with structures though, which are now tried and tested. So for example, one issue could be in outcome funding, the money is tied to achievement of an outcome. Now what happens if the outcome is not achieved? You still have to meet your CSR spend requirements. So we have come up with solutions where you can give the money and use it for an outcome or use it for another purpose, but still be compliant. And these are now tested, and this is easier to kind of achieve and talk to CSRs and scale it, right? Because the journey over the last 4 or 5 years has been that who's taking the risk on these transactions and testing the water and saying that these are doable using these forms of, you know, capital. And now because we have examples and it's been tried and tested for 2-3 years, I think it's okay to kind of talk about it and say this is scalable. These are things you can talk about to other sort of CSRs, because the first question is, can I give CSR for this product? Can I put it into SSC? Can I put it into an impact bond? Can I give it for outcomes-based financing, which is tied to outcomes? So that's one key thing from a CSR perspective. The second key regulation is FCRA. This is one of those things which we cannot talk about in a public forum. This has become far worse. This is unfortunately the way it works is, I think bulk of the funding comes from foreign sources. So there is always a interest in tapping this money, but also doing it in a way that is doesn't trigger FCRA. It's extremely subjective. It is fact specific. And coming to Karthik's point on templatization, this has been a bit of a shifting sand, because couple of times regulations have changed in the middle of transactions and we have had to rework it to make it workable. It's a very subjective assessment depending on the sector you're working on, the kind of parties that are involved, persons that are involved. It comes to an assessment of where the Ministry of Home Affairs may perceive some sort of a risk or a challenge, right? I think, but there is a lot of areas where there is still potential to tap this money and work. And we continue to innovate the manner in which this money can be tapped. It's not just necessarily grants, but also in terms of, you know, deploying it through outcome-based service fees, or doing it through guarantee structures, or at an offshore level doing it as a, you know, guarantee. And we've seen funds where foundations are giving guarantees at an offshore level to de-risk investments and stand as a guarantor. So these kind of structures are still doable, and there's a way to de-risk it and still push it through. So there is a lot of things which are high risk and we have to work around, but this is the biggest challenge that, you know, we have to deal with in tapping this money. The other part is FEMA. I think here also there has been some challenges. I think even just unlocking for-profit money from outside, like when you look at the projects, they're usually for 5 years. If you come through the external commercial borrowings route, for example, under debt, there is a minimum maturity period, there is a lock-in period which doesn't work for many investors. So projects which have shorter cycles, we have seen generally take off for less than 3 years. If it's 5 years, 7 years, and that sort of patient capital is also required in the sector, but that's been a bit of a challenge. The FPI VRR route is one potential way to bring in some debt capital. And recently we've heard that the RBI is looking more closely at instruments with variable interest rates and things like that. So, which is ideal from an impact perspective, where if the interest rate could be tied to achievement of an outcome, it's ideal. But I think there are again things we need to work around, which becomes a challenge when it comes to templatizing these models. So the structures have ended up becoming very bespoke. There are many pilot and successful structures that are there, which are ready for scale in the right context and in the right sector. Income tax and GST is another challenge. You will see that when we are talking about investing blended finance and focusing on outcomes, I think from a non-profit perspective, a lot of the entities that are good at achieving impact on the ground and have a lead in terms of how to measure it, how to achieve it, are all in the non-profit sector. So they come with a whole bunch of challenges, having a tax exempt registration that they can't accept more service fees more than 20%. You have to spend the money in a certain way and achieve outcomes. So that kind of compliance again is a bit of a challenge. And causes issues, and there are limitations in how to get money to them. GST is another challenge when you are kind of having entities, non-profit entities straddling, providing services. They have to get a registration, compliances. So I think slowly over the last 5-6 years, at least for the non-profits that are interested in the space, in the outcome space, working on impact bonds, there's been a lot of skilling up in terms of internal compliances and even for listing on the social stock exchange. I think they are becoming more corporate. They have to build that level of transparency and compliances internally, and that makes it easier for investors to kind of diligence them, see that they are investable, and actually have the confidence to fund them. On the for-profit side, now having covered the laws, and I'll get into fund regulations in a bit, but the other challenge we have seen is with blended finance. We recently set up a fund for the government, which was announced as part of G20 in GIFT City, which is maybe the first fund with only social returns and no financial returns. And the challenge we are facing there is that everybody in the financial sector, I think, is more interested in blended finance, with money going into climate and water, and blended finance becoming more common term that is used. But I think the challenge is if we are de-risking and taking concessional capital, there's going to be a more focus on impact. And some of the outcome funding structures, impact bonds, those are structures where on the other end of the spectrum, where money has been tied specifically to the achievement of predetermined outcomes. There is a metric, there is a measurement. And that's not something I think the financial sector is fully comfortable with or aware of. I think people in the non-profit sector who have been focusing on outcomes are a lot more comfortable. And why I say that is finding a fund manager for that fund has proven to be a difficult task, because they said if our management fees are going to be tied to outcomes which we are not comfortable measuring or managing, so then there is pressure. So in terms of tapping this capital, I think both ends of the spectrum have to come more to a middle meeting ground in terms of solving for this problem. For-profit sector has to understand outcome measurement and management better, and the non-profit sector has to corporatize a bit more and become more investable and give that kind of confidence to investors and have a pipeline of investments ready. AIF regulations is also key, because this is one of the most progressive regulations we have. Generally, if you see, most of the regulations are built in such a way that they don't want to see intermixing of for-profit and non-profit money. I think the idea is for-profit money comes in, you make an upside, you set aside for CSR or for grant making, and that's just expensed out. Any sort of return seeking or paying for outcomes or a for-profit entity or leveraging it through blended finance is viewed with suspicion, because the question is, are you then using grant money for profiteering or to pay somebody's upside, right? I think the focus from that side has to be, are we scaling impact using this money through blended finance, and should not be on the return seeking side. So fund regulations, and SEBI has been very progressive. They have come up with social venture fund regulations some time back, the social impact fund regulations, the social stock exchange regulations. So as a vehicle, as far as regulations are concerned, it allows for mixing of different forms of capital. But the challenge, like I said, was tax, FCRA or CSR, because of which this is not feasible in an easy way. So it's mostly workaround structures. But with GIFT City and more progressive regulations coming through on the policy side, we continue to drive this, and I think the future looks brighter than where it was 5 years back, because a lot of this has been deregulated and there's more focus on this area. So impact funds, social stock exchange regulations, again, we are doing listed impact bonds, we're doing off-market impact bonds, we're doing listings on the social stock exchange. challenges there. There are other new opportunities that are coming up, and there's more interest in carbon credits and green credits, and how to sort of there is this green credit also recently they have notified on afforestation and tree plantation, and water is mentioned, but that's something that we'll have to wait to see what the regulations are coming up on that and what benefits we can make out of that. So there could be some sort of tax incentives and other ways to look at this kind of incentives going forward. So as I said, the regulations are becoming more progressive and more opportunities are. It's a bunch of benefits compared to being in India if it's a financial product. So we've heard that carbon credits could be notified as a financial product, and they want to make it a global trading hub there. So these are the things. Relevant structures, again, we've spoken about social venture funds, impact bonds, outcome funding, returnable grants. So these are examples of instruments that are there today, tried and tested to a great extent in different contexts. All of them are amenable to being repurposed or used in the context of WASH. And I think the lack of outcome funders, at least my sense is that there are geographical and thematic focuses for many outcome funders, and WASH has historically not been on the top of the agenda. But no reason why any of these tested structures cannot be used in any of for WASH structures. So maybe I'll pause there, and it's very fact specific. Happy to take questions and address the real questions that are there on your mind instead of going on about what else is possible.
Thank you, Maya. We've heard from Karthik, we've heard from Maya. There is a lot to unpack in this space. So we'll now leave you to an open discussion, a moderated open discussion. We have close to 35 to 40 minutes for this. So please feel free to pose any questions you may have had on the structures that were presented, or just anything else that comes to your mind to the audience. So I'll invite Karthik to moderate it.
In the room, and maybe we can start with Bonani, if you would. So, WASH-related activities are obviously a subset, or maybe it's not obvious, but part of climate financing, which is seeing a huge interest, and there's a large amount of capital in the space. And given your recently announced NAB Samruddhi Climate Ready WASH funding program, how do you see the potential for unlocking more capital from this space? And if you can share a bit more about what you guys are doing at NABA.
Do you want to start? Yeah, absolutely. I think it would be better, yeah. So thanks, Karthik. I think, very relevant question for us. So we have been championing WASH financing for the last 2 years, and so far disbursements have been scaling up, especially after we signed the MOU with Water.org 2 years back. And we realized that there is a nexus or a very intricate relationship between climate and WASH. And anyway, we were doing climate financing. So then we launched the Climate Ready WASH Finance Program in November this year. And what we are aiming at is that, first of all, the WASH structures or solutions that are being financed, they need to sustain, number one. Number two, ultimately, when climate impacts WASH, and the other way, the reverse is also true. Unsafe WASH can also impact climate. We have heard of methane emissions from pit latrines, and COP28 has highlighted that there has to be a global methane pledge, and we know that how much that is going to impact climate. 0.2 degrees centigrade is what they're looking at. So therefore, what we are trying to do now is that we are trying to finance both the sides, the demand side, the households. So right now we have already given 5 to 6 loans, sanctioned 6 loans, and one more in the process, which is through our MFI partners. So just for those who are unacquainted, we are a NBFC subsidiary of NABARD, and we are focusing on the non-agricultural sector, because there is another subsidiary, NAB Kisan, which looks at FPOs and the farm sector, and our focus is on ESG. So in that, green and wellness finance is our major focus segment. And under wellness, WASH is the champion segment. It emerged as a champion segment, and that's great news for everyone here in the room, that when we said we wanted to do green and wellness, WASH emerged on its own as a champion segment. So there was that kind of a demand, because rural women are highly aspirational. And then we looked at the flood affected areas, and we found, no, this is not sustaining. There's a lot of contamination. They cannot access toilets when there is a flood. And we looked at drought affected, and we realized that where is the water? I mean, there's so much of water scarcity, and some of these communities or areas, as per the CEEW report, they are new to such situations, so they need a lot of adaptation as well. So that's where we brought in the technical support. So water.org is one partner, there are others as well, and we tried to address the demand side first of all, and MFI is really tipped up. It was a matter of conviction. Once an institution, a financial institution, is convinced that this is required, not only for the social cause, because an MFI is a commercial entity, we are also a commercial entity. So what we're looking at is the long-term sustainability of me as an institution, right? So MFIs have also now, they are slowly getting convinced that for them to sustain themselves in the long run, WASH is essential, and climate ready WASH or climate and WASH finance is all the more essential, because in the long term they cannot sustain health, productivity, nor the structures if they don't look at it through a climate lens. So now that there is a conviction, we saw more and more MFIs coming into it. And that is a great thing. And we financed, and along with that, we arranged for exposure visits, awareness campaigns, then collaborative meetings, so that the technical knowledge comes in as well, right? And then we looked at the supply side as well, because unless there are innovations, unless there are SMEs who are able to deliver the products, then it doesn't take off. It doesn't help anyone. Today, because we have EcoSan toilets, at least we are just going to Trichy for an exposure visit, taking the smaller MFIs along who are willing to do this. They're willing to replicate this. So we found that interest in our partners, and directly also a few project loans we are looking at. I think Natasha and we were just discussing, and water.org is like totally grateful to them, because it's not just the technical support, starting from lead generation till the very end, a pipeline of SMEs, pipeline of MFIs as well, and then the training of these entities, our partners, and some kind of support. In some cases, it's come in the form of salary of 1 or 2 resource persons, because there is a cost involved here for a financial entity. So now the question is, what is the challenge we are facing here? The challenge is one of pricing. For the demand side, not so much, because an MFI borrower will take a loan at the same rate as a MF loan. Even they're willing to pay more for a toilet loan, because they believe in it. They are very happy with their toilets, with the piped water. We have seen monthly income increase by 3,000 rupees per family, and that's huge for a rural area, for a rural woman. And just because one of our partners gave them a piped water solution loan, right? So these changes, they are eager to. So demand side, the pricing is fine for the ultimate, but what about our partner? Our partner has to spend more money, right? So we are trying to blend there as well. And NABARD gives us a concession. Our parent is NABARD. NABARD gives us a concession as well on this loan, on WASH loan, which we pass on, and we add a little bit of our own, so that it becomes viable for our client to finance the households for climate ready WASH solutions. But where it comes to the SMEs, we are finding it very difficult, because there the pricing is not working out, because these are, like, I think it was already discussed, some of them are just coming out of the early, that valley of death, right? Some of them are just in the growth stage. So my loan will come at a very high rate if I don't get security, and security comes with a price. So that's why we are here today looking at a lot of blended finance solutions, and we feel like this is what is really required. And today, if we can connect them to some kind of a grant fund, like for those of our SMEs whose outcome is in agriculture, we are trying to connect them with the IFAD gap fund. So that, yeah, that money comes in. So we can say, okay, our loan cannot be lower than this, the pricing. However, we are trying to get you this. And use whatever networks, the power of networks, I think that's very important. And along with that, of course, we are looking at actual guarantees, so that we can reduce our cost. And that's very important. And technical support is coming in. We are grateful, and we are looking at more such, networks and connecting the collaborative action, and I think that's very important. Thank you so much.
India Sanitation Coalition is working across the full value chain. So just building upon what was just said, are there any particular areas that you see which could be more relevant for bringing in blended finance and catalyzing finance as per the larger trends in climate finance?
So I'm just going to
I'm just going to give you some examples which are actually challenges for us today. So India Sanitation Coalition, for those of you who don't know, is really a coalition of partners that come together to look at wash solutions both for urban and rural India. We work primarily with the government. We have, in fact, all our projects are government-based, and we bring in the private sector as and where required. So I'll first go to the rural areas, because the rural government is something that we worked with for a long time. One project that we started with them about 2 years ago, which is the Lighthouse Project. That is actually a very ambitious project where they're looking to put in solid and liquid waste management structures across all the 6.6 lakh villages of India. Even I laugh sometimes when I think about it. We've just finished phase 1, and what was really a good outcome was that we had corporates coming in and funding this for 75 GPs, so all the villages under these 75 GPs across 15 states through their CSR. But this is not feasible in the, when you think about 6.6 lakh villages. So phase 2, which actually starts on the 1st of April, is looking at it from a completely different angle. Corporates coming in, bringing in funding through CSR, but also through their supply chains, so which is market finance, as well as we're looking at a blend of equity and debt coming in. So that is on the rural side. Is it going to be easy? No, but we're starting and we're learning as we go along the way. We're approaching, so we've started a wash financing group within ISC as well. We're inviting a lot of partners to come in. That's banks, financial institutions, as well as NBFCs and others, and the RBI is there as well, because the government is always, again, part of what we do. And we're trying to create structures, but which are scalable in the form of groups. So for example, if something works in a particular state, can that be replicated across other states as well? So that is something that we will see going forward, how it works for us. On the urban side, we've just signed an MOU with Mahua, where they are looking at us bringing in a lot of private sector finance for the various projects. So there are 2 or 3 big projects that we're working on right now. One is what we call the plastic plastic circularity within the state of Maharashtra. So we've taken, they've asked us to take the 6 of the 1 million plus population cities. This is a project that started last year. The research for this is already completed. And in these cities, what we're looking at is creating a system whereby we're looking at household to MRF and MRF to buyer. These are 2 separate sections altogether. The household to MRF piece has already been completed in terms of research, and we start the implementation from 1st of April onwards. This is entirely not CSR driven. So there is a blend. There, in the research part of it, there was a blend. But when we come to the implementation part, when you think about it, the household to MRF piece is going to be nano enterprises. How do we fund these nano enterprises? How do we get the waste workers to actually come in the form of collaborative, so self-help groups, and actually run these enterprises? That is really what we're looking at, and that's really where the financial structures come in. Again, can it be modular? Can it be something that we can, formulate in terms of, kind of a collaborative, and then take it to other parts of India as well. So they want to pilot this in Maharashtra, as I said, and then take it across to other states. The piece that is going to be very interesting for our corporates is really the MRF to buyer, which is where you get the right quality of waste that comes in to the MRF and then actually goes across, to be enhanced. So plastic, for example, I know that's not part of this conversation, but honestly, some of the structures that I think the Trilegal team was putting up were fascinating, because I think we can actually use these structures, and we'd like to have a much more detailed discussion with you on that. For solid waste as well. Karthik, you spoke about solid waste, but I think we cannot talk about wash without talking about solid waste. In India, you do not get waste in a particular format. You get it all together. We all know that. So specifically with regards to urban solutions, this is one of the big challenges we're facing. And the other project on climate change, which I'd just like to mention, is something that we started with Mahua again along the west coast of India. There are 4 states, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Karnataka, and Goa. And this is in partnership with IIT Bombay. So they're doing research for these 4 states where they're looking at 15 cities of different sizes, specifically with regards to climate change. Now, you will know, through reading that the west coast of India is going to actually come under a lot more pressure going forward. And it is really that part which is concerning the government. How do we actually fortify this with regards to climate change? So we are actually working with them to look at what are the gaps that need to be assessed, and then how do we shore up these gaps through these 15 cities. This will then get incorporated into the plan for these 4 states going forward. So a lot of work in there as well. But as I said, financing is now way beyond CSR for us. It is really going into the financial, what is available in the financial markets today, and not just in the traditional context, but how can we actually look at risk, bring down that risk, not again from looking at a blended form alone, but really get financial institutions and NBFCs to review their portfolios and see whether they need to look at risk in a different way. So yeah, lots of work there as well for us.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
The example you talked about, MRFs, waste processing, Bhubaneswar has done a very interesting experiment in terms of engaging with NGOs. So I hope you've seen that model. They're also looking at plastic waste recycling, combining sand, C&D waste with plastic. And there is, I think, a pilot project being supported by UN Habitat. But the state government and the city is very open to funding it themselves because it's a pressing problem today.
Yeah, so there are different models that different parts of India are using, but are these scalable? Because sustainability is a big issue. Really.
That's exactly what Orissa is grappling with. They don't want a pilot. They say, solve the citywide problem.
Just in the interest of time, moving to the capital intermediaries, I would love to get Nirav and Himanshu to also opine that when you guys are thinking about the start, Nirav, of building a large blended finance facility in a sector like WASH, how do you think about the areas where it could be relevant? Question number 1. And question number 2 is, what are the challenges in mobilizing investors, both philanthropic and commercial, to get them interested in this? So, if you could share a little bit about your experience.
So I'll start with the challenges, and very much what you touched upon, which is, how do we bring diversity and certainty of payment? If the government's going to be your key procurer, and at the same time, if we have all the challenges, then is it a role for an intermediary? For example, borrowing from some other sectors, what we see in case of electrification of buses, the World Bank had to step in and guarantee repayment by the states to the private sector entities that were providing electric buses as a service. So is there an opportunity for financing to come in to solve some of these issues? To Maya's point, and here's something I want to highlight, and Maya would sort of corroborate the point I'm trying to make. On one hand, we're trying to bring more sustainability into WASH. Sustainability means we're trying to get more private sector participation. At the same time, we all agree that it's a sector that needs some kind of CSR support. So how do we get CSR to support private organizations is a huge conundrum that needs to be addressed. And there is no straightforward way of doing that at the moment, right? So then you go about adopting circuitous routes, expose yourself as a CSR organization to all kinds of scrutiny. But the fact is that we have to bring private sector entities. Private sector entities would have to be motivated to participate. So one of the things that with Natasha we are exploring is the acceleration and the awards route to get more WASH tech enterprises. Now that's a route which has been proven to be kosher. Government is okay with CSR money going towards awards and acceleration. That's fine. Now imagine these organizations that are coming out of the accelerator. And now they've reached a certain level of maturity. They are private sector organizations. But now they are facing the valley of death. How do you support them with any form of blending? That's, according to me, one of the key challenges that we've run into. But my colleague Aparna is also here. Let me check if she wants to add anything.
You've raised, Natasha, you raised, and Venu and Maya as well. I think WASH as a sector has not traditionally, that's the reason why we're all sitting here today, not seen a lot of private sector finance. So the question that we're kind of asking ourselves is, what will it really take? CSR is definitely, one way to do that. Domestic philanthropy has a huge role to play, whether it's through, foundations, international foundations, DFI as well, who can bring in that concessional capital to help, young enterprises tide over that valley of death. And that's where we believe, some of the outcome-based financing, programs that, transactions that Maya talked about, or even other forms of blending where you understand specific challenges. Karthik, you brought that up in your presentation, right? Which is what we've heard. We heard Dinesh Ji also talk about it. There's a lot of dependence on government as the payer, and that often scares private investors to come in, right? It's clunky, the revenues don't come in time. So is there a way for us to solve for specific challenges like this, which would make the sector then a lot more amenable to private finance come in? So these are some of the challenges that we're working to solve, and would love to hear other sort of voices in the room as to how they're thinking about it and join hands with them.
Super, thank you. I just wanted to get Himanshu in, and then we can open it up. So sorry, because just brief intro. So Samred has done wonderful work in healthcare, and I know that you guys are looking at climate, plastic, circularity, maybe WASH. So what are your thoughts on this, Himanshu?
No, thanks. Like when I was a student, he has been working in that area since then, and kind of some of the challenges that exist in WASH, which have been highlighted across, and I think the biggest one is the politics. Why are governments not able to pay for the services that they procure from the private sector? Because they're not able to charge. We talk about municipal corporations, we talk about other urban local bodies. When they're not charging any kind of user fees, when they're only dependent upon property tax, which even after decades of efforts, the collections are dismal in most of the cities. There may be one odd Pimpri Chichwards or the major corporations which are able to generate revenues, but of the 4,000, 5,000 municipalities in the country, the challenge is that there is no revenue collection. So how do you get private investor to come in? And why the collection is not there is purely political. So I think that's where we need to kind of start, because it's not that the people are not willing to pay. People are paying actually much more. And the same challenge has existed in the healthcare sector as well, where you say that health is a public good and government should be responsible to provide that. And at the same time, the out-of-pocket expenditure is the highest in the healthcare case. That's the same case when it comes to sanitation, whether it's water or other sanitation services. So the challenge needs to be addressed is that how can we kind of make models which can be put forward where the user fees collection becomes easy, can be kind of demonstrated well, that can kind of help generate the investor confidence, and then things can be taken forward. And it's again not something which has not been done in the past. Sujata ma'am is here, and she would remember the pooled financing work that was done under USAID 5D program almost 20 years back in Tamil Nadu and other southern cities. Worked really well. But have we taken it forward to other cities? Probably not, because of, again, the political challenge, that how do you convince the political leadership to take that? So that's the first big thing that I think we need to address if we have to see whether it's solid waste management or whether it's WASH to be taken forward. The second thing is urban and rural are totally different games when it comes to WASH. And they have to be seen from totally different approaches, totally different lenses. And often we kind of try to see that, okay, what works in urban would work in rural also and vice versa, which will not happen. The third big thing is mainstreaming. Now, we are talking about blended finance and WASH right now here in this room. Is financing there in WASH, generally speaking also? Probably not. So mainstreaming and working from the very beginning to see how our mainstream financial institutions, banks or investors at large can come in, and that kind of links to the first point, that who is going to pay back the money. So the pooled financing structuring that was done almost 2 decades back was where blended finance actually worked very well, where USAID, state governments, and the national government came to de-risk the investment from the perspective of the private investor. And that was a very efficient model where 13 or 30 municipalities came together to create that pool structure, raise money, develop infrastructure, deliver services, take user fees back from the customers, and pay back those bonds. And investor was safeguarded through risk guarantees coming from DFC at that time, it was called something else, as well as state and national government. There was also a point raised in the morning about rating of municipalities. It's not a new concept. Again, both ICRA as well as other rating, CRISIL and all have been doing ratings for municipalities for a number of years. Of late, I have not seen many, but those have been there. So it's more about kind of seeing what has already worked in the past and replicating it across the country and pushing for the political will. Those are my kind of 2 cents to this.
Yeah, please. On this. So actually, I absolutely agree with you. I think I wouldn't call it political will as much as calling it what the government wants to get done. You know, if you kind of anchor it there, it really works. And that's just my experience. So the projects for us which have been successful are the ones which we've anchored on the government's requirement. So if I just take this plastic circularity project, which they asked us to start, essentially they have got the buy-in from the 6 city ULB heads that they would like to go ahead and put this in place. So when you've got that political will, if we can call it that, at the ground level, working with you, then what becomes easier is to actually get the private sector involved. Where the challenge is coming is when you want to, standardize it. So, for example, I was talking about the household to MRF process. That process, we don't want it to be run by the ULB. It has to be, decoupled from them, because one thing that we've realized, which is there both on the rural and urban side, is that the government is very good at putting up infrastructure, but what they're not good at doing is running it on a regular basis over a period of time and making it sustainable. And when you say that it's the government's job and they have to manage it, I think India as a country is still far away. That's my personal opinion. We're still far away from that. So we're not the West, where the government manages central services like water and sanitation yet. And I think the private sector has to play a role in that. So why not use it and make it commercially viable, which is where this whole concept of integrating it into a nano enterprise comes in. And can we actually, standardize it in the form of, how do we create it in one city and then take it across the rest? So I just wanted to maybe add that. Yeah.
I know we're almost out of time. We're actually out of time, but we do need to get a couple of funder perspectives in here. So if I can request Neha from FCDO and Kezia from the Dolakia Foundation to share how do you guys, as funders who have been active in the space, think about how do we attract more domestic or international development capital into this space? Does it have something to do with tracking outcomes? I know that FCDO focuses a lot on gender and health outcomes. So how do you think about all of what has been discussed, and how do we bring in more philanthropic capital into this space?
Thanks, Karthik. So just to give a bit of a context of what UK government does in India, it of course works with policymakers, with different ministries, and with think tanks to address the market barriers in particular sectors through technical assistance. But alongside that, how do we really support the private sector? And, the colleagues talked about how do you ensure that, it is a sustainable kind of ecosystem where the private sector is flourishing enough so that, there are solutions that are catering to development challenges. And that is where we have partnered with Indian government in across various themes and across different funds. And I think that is where perhaps it's a little different perspective to what others would be, are presenting. We have invested in various funds under the SEBI AIF regulations, and those funds are, have been in the past focused on, let's say, low-income states of India, into tier 2, tier 3 cities, and also in sectors which have been, till date, underinvested. So basically sectors and themes which are underinvested, and companies which are at an early stage. So, really helping them come up through their value of death by providing that early stage capital to help them really scale up their innovative solutions so that it can reach to more and more, underserved population. So that has been the theme till date, and we have of course kind of focused earlier on in low income states, but now moving across Indian overall kind of the country, pan India focus. And WASH has been a central kind of sector where a lot of our investments through our funds have focused on. It ranges from, let's say, clean water ATM solutions to tier 2, tier 3 cities at an affordable rate, to having a water treatment plant to ensure adequate kind of water supply, and also treating the wastewater. And apart from that, there are many other kind of small technologies that we have supported in terms of innovative technologies to purify water, etc. And these have been through various kind of funding. So, going back to, one of the slides that was presented in terms of different kind of blended finance structures that are possible, with a different lens of an equity funder alongside technical assistance. We have tested concessional financing through, a concessional kind of lending to intermediaries for providing micro loans in WASH sectors, let's say in Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan. We've also, tested with a different kind of results-based outcome funding, I would say, where majority of our focus has been to partner with general partners and fund managers. So basically, I don't think this is functioning. Yeah, it's working now. So partnering with the fund managers who understand, apart from commercial incentives, who actually understand social incentives, and how we have tested that is a decade back, kind of designing remunerative, mechanisms where we are actually like something similar to what Karthik mentioned in terms of sync. So social impact incentives, so linking their incentives to the outcomes that they are achieving on the ground in terms of ESG, so improvement and strengthening the ESG's, compliances of the private sector in terms of the social impact that they create on the ground. And of course, there are a number of indicators which are defined under that. So those are few examples, and then alongside that, I think a soft capital is important as well, because we're working with small and medium enterprises which are at a very early stage. They may not have the kind of bandwidth to understand and appreciate how to assess impact, how to measure impact, how to evaluate whether they have reached that level as well. And alongside, what are some of the policy barriers which can be addressed for them to function better or scale better. So that is, those are some of the areas, and of course through trainings, etc., really helping them understand, what is that best practices from the international ecosystem which they can as private sector adopt, and in effect it's ultimately for their own benefit, because when they scale, they're able to attract more global capital and also global partnerships for their businesses to kind of sustain further. So those were some of the kind of examples with which how we have kind of blended finance and attracted by providing public capital, private sector, but alongside private sector, from the domestic area, it's also international capital, both in the form of DFIs and also private, to help these enterprises scale further.
Super, thank you so much. In addition to those capital sources which are critical, we like to think that domestic capital also has a very big role to play. So could you please share your perspective on this?
Thank you so much, Karthik. So just a brief background about the Dholakia Foundation. We are the philanthropic arm of HK Diamonds. And we do most of our implementation work. We don't have a specific portfolio in WASH, but we are rejuvenating freshwater systems. And obviously, this is where our theory of change comes from. And I feel like our work has a lot to do with climate financing as it pertains to WASH. So our financing model right now has been a combination of CSR philanthropy and also government funding. However, as we scale our work, because our scope right now is in Gujarat, and in that we have rejuvenated 141 lakes in the state, currently benefiting 250,000 farmers. So when we assessed how do we scale our work in improving natural ecosystems, WASH was was one of the main outcomes. So currently, in doing that, we are establishing a restoration fund in partnership with Waterfields Advisory, which is a good also friend of ICC. And in addition to that, we are planning to mobilize funds from climate finance banks internationally. We're still in our early stages though, so basically I'm here to listen more than speak. So happy to learn from everyone here. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one more capital intermediary in the room who came in late, but Amit Garg from COIS, you guys have done a lot of work in WASH, and what have been your experiences in building blended finance facilities?
Sure. Yes, we have done a few deals on WASH globally. Roughly, we've done about $100 million worth of bonds, but I'm personally not a big fan of bonds. I don't think it's a good use of capital, especially in a scarce environment like ours. My sense is a combination of most of the stuff that Meppen presented was largely debt. I think there was, barring one instrument, it's largely debt plus philanthropic capital. My sense here is if we can focus on mitigating the gap between the risk perception and the risk reality, using ideally grants, that is the best case scenario for us to actually do large scale stuff. I'm very happy to talk more about that. And thank you so much, Karthik, for bringing me on.
Sure. And I think we just have a couple more minutes, but it'll be great. I think GIZ is also in the room. Yes, we'd love to get your perspective, sir, on maybe the operational design of these projects. How do we make them inherently fundable? Or anything else you want to share?
I'm sorry, but I don't represent our operations, which do a lot of in-wash. And what we are looking at now is supporting blended finance through many manners. And WASH will be on our radar, but we haven't done that yet. There's a lot of technical support which we have provided to state governments in terms of planning, in terms of blueprints. That is what we have done. We haven't gone into the financing aspect yet. Sorry to disappoint.
No problem. Just wanted to check. That's us. Do we have Satish here from USAID? Would you like to conclude, perhaps, unless anyone else has any comments? Because USAID has a whole program in WASH, and if you would like to just sort of synthesize, and share any thoughts from your side.
Yeah, sure. Great thoughts, and I think across the conundrum of various forms of capital, and so just stepping back from WASH as a sector in terms of how we thought that this actually adds value was around the COVID time when many of these we needed quick response. So Samrid happened or scaled up during that time. So blended finance is a potent instrument to tackle some of these challenges was felt at that point of time. And then it was in terms of 2-3 things. One is helping the market understand that value, or how can we be catalyst to that. Second is how can we use our grant capital as a catalytic funding to help organization move towards that path to profitability. And the second is in terms of how can we de-risk some of the enterprises. So we've been working in various, and we talked about some of those areas. Mark touched upon the credit guarantees and some of the impact-led initiatives that we've been working on. So, but the crux of the matter is, how can all these forms of different capital and each of them having very different I would say, requirement or what they're looking for, come together and create that value together. And I think that's where the sweet spot would be. So, yeah, thanks.
1:15. Thank you, Karthik. Thank you, Satish. And thank you, everyone, for being a very patient audience. We'll just leave y'all with one last segment. Y'all are soon going to be receiving certain question sets on your table. These are certain pointed questions which we as a council would like to receive your inputs on, which we can further synthesize and share with policy regulators, with the industry as a whole. And maybe also give you a chance to converse with each other and deliberate on what could be these potential opportunities and outcomes which you would like to achieve with each other. So this is going to be a focus group conversation. We leave you for the discussions we have close to around 15-20 minutes for this. And after that, what we'll request is for one moderator from every table to just summarize what you all have discussed and what are the top findings or the insights which you would like to share with the room. So with that, we'll just proceed into the focus group, and please feel free to be as candid as you'd like in the points you'd like to note. Thank you. Of a very interesting discussion. I'm sure we have a lot to speak and we can take this over lunch. But for now, I'll request if we could go around the tables and one person from each table kind of summarize what you all have been discussing for the last half an hour or so. So with that, I'll just request, we'll be moving around the tables one by one. I'll just be requesting each person to stand up and share a few things. Starting with table 2.
Thanks. So just a quick couple of points I think that came up in the discussion is, in terms of the sector, we thought that's most likely to get funding was maybe water, because of the focus on climate and the linkages with water. And I think even in terms of thank you. So I think so I think in terms of the amount of funding that's focused on climate, any WASH project that has a outcome that could be linked to that may have a higher chance of just raising the money in the current climate. In terms of collaboration opportunities, I think technology, relying on technology, data analytics to try and nudge the government or figure out where the support is required, I think was another point that came up. What would be the support required to scale opportunities is, awareness building, demand generation, marketing support, capacity building for the businesses would make a pipeline of investable businesses. And I think the key intervention is maybe government buy-in, government support, knowledge sharing with them, and actively making them a participant would help scale. I think these were the quick points that came up on the discussion. So.
Thanks. So I'm going to try and summarize. Our table mostly had representatives from CSR, family foundations. So we had the Dholakia Foundation, we had HUL, ACT Grants, and then Tata Trust, and then Neerav and myself from the Blended Finance Company. So I think in terms of challenges, in addition to what's already been discussed earlier today, discoverability of high quality NGOs came up, and potentially using SSC or some sort of collaboratives as a way to vet good non-profits or even for-profits could be explored. Then the other point that was brought up was around having projects, if we can call it quote unquote good projects, which basically align with scale, geography, are focused on the topics where foundations are currently working. So being able to find them, so not just projects, finding the right partners to do this as well. And then the whole reporting angle that goes with it, so becomes very important from a CSR and a foundation perspective to find the credible partners. Some other really interesting points that came that foundations look at, which currently are challenges, is how do you transfer the ownership back to community once a project needs to exit, finding the right talent pool, dealing with government approvals, and then also finding newer solutions, firstly, say in spaces like agri and industry, which are heavy consumers of water, but also then scaling this up to become B2C solutions. So what is the right way for that to go forward? In terms of, what kind of support, so blended finance, of course, since we're all discussing it, did come up, but in terms of what additional support is really required at this point is, really working with partners on the ground to helping them scale, providing flexible capital almost in the form of VGF, so whether that's, funding personal costs, which often CSR organizations are not able to do, or CapEx. So looking at VGF models or the co-impact model was discussed, where you form a collaborative and get different foundations to pool into that and then leverage your resources that way. In terms of potential that we see in the blended finance space or using outcome-based financing models, there was general interest. We didn't really kind of get into this too much, but the challenges are again around regulation. So Maya, your help here would be very, very important. How does CSR really participate? But in case that can be solved for, then there is general openness. But here is where the family foundation capital is really, really flexible, and I think bringing that into blended finance, creating good examples that then can be kind of emulated in the larger industry. And then obviously exploring incubators and accelerators as a way to also tap into grant capital. So Social Alpha, obviously we have Venu over here as well, who talked about their work. So lots of different incubators, accelerators can be used, and the CSR regulation actually allows you to do that as well.
Yeah, thank you. So our table was basically looking at from an investor's perspective. So we believe that government has to be involved, come what may. We have to have their involvement in making the water and sanitation projects. A project cannot be taking an ad hoc approach. We saw the excellent initiative of Suvidha by HUL and the HSBC and the other partners. How can we replicate that? So we as investors will be happy to support this project, but the challenge we face are twofold. One, the people who are involved, they have to be enough motivated in terms of even remuneration. Who pays for them, because sometimes they are not enough motivation to do that. So that is one challenge we thought. And second is, all of us will be knowing that the receivables are getting stuck there from the government. So if a private partnership or a guarantee structure can be there, where we have private players coming in who can help investors to kind of tell them on a definitive basis that yes, your money is protected, you will get your money on time. So that will be a helpful part from that perspective. That's one. Second is, there are a lot of SMEs or financial institutions who are willing to work in this, but they face challenges in getting the technical assistance. We as investors are happy to fund such organizations, but the technical assistance kind of sphere has to be increased, and whosoever is involved can take it and increase their money and work with the grants. And the third part which we want to just talk is about how do we monitor the impact. One way is obviously we can always talk about number of people reached, right? That is one way, that is the easiest way. But how do we do that? The example which we were using, that all of us talk about, time value of money, but nobody talks of money value of time. Now, if a person is able to save 3 hours every day in using, not going to the toilet or not going to have to fetch water from a centralized area, the kind of, the amount of time that is saved at a family level is just huge. If we can just try to quantify and put in perspective, what is the time saving there, one. Second, I think what we can do is, if he said that, there was a decrease in diarrhea cases, what does it mean in saving health costs for that family? As you always say, such people are just one accident away from pushing them back into poverty, right? So if we can save that, quantify that money. Third will be when, unfortunately, such activities fall into purview of young girls. If we can say, they are saving time, they're going to school, or ladies who are able to generate or double their income. Somebody mentioned about 3,000 rupees saving, increase in income per month. Such numbers can be given. That will be really helpful. I think those are the kind of things which can be, quantified for everybody's benefit. Fourth point, which I did not discuss in the group, but as a foreign investors, I would like to highlight, and that ties up to what Trilegal was saying, which that point was missed, is something about withholding tax, because IIC works with the government. If you can take this point, there has been a massive increase in the withholding taxes to the extent that it has become unviable for few investors. Just to share perspective of people, it has gone up from 5 to 22%. Now, if that's a kind of investment, the withholding tax increase happens, that's not going to be profitable. So I would request, take this opportunity on this forum, if we can work with the government and the players to talk about that issue. Not so talked much about withholding tax issue also. Thank you, everybody.
In terms of which segment of wash value chain do we see being more commercial ready, I think through the research study as well, SMEs that are doing B2B business, especially on asset side of things, where it is more to do with creating an STP plant or creation of a hard asset, that is commercially a little more ready from a financier perspective. So that's just one segment that we think can have a better focus. In terms of collaboration opportunities, I think it's more to do with more grant capital coming in terms of de-risking investments from a capital provider side, as well as thinking about how grant capital can come in terms of interest subvention or any other mechanism through which it becomes easier for payments to happen in terms of payments to service providers. For the third question, to scale opportunities, again, I think the focus will be on one, providing TA grants to just build these financing instruments. It is a significantly large time cost as well as effort cost that kind of goes in. Everything from estimating the funding quantum required, the gap funding requirements, as well as what kind of financial instruments, fundraising for that financial instrument, doing the term sheets, the contracts. It kind of takes some more time. So just providing that TA support will be very critical. And one or two interventions that will help create a supportive ecosystem. I think the one key point that we can focus upon is how is it that we reduce the turnaround time for collaborative pooling of funds. If, say, 3 CSRs can come together, how much time does it take? And can we reduce that time lag? Can we reduce the time lag of commercial capital and grant capital coming together for a particular transaction? I think that's one area of focus that we can think about. So that's it. Thank you.
Point which was discussed, one of them is tweaking the at stack, or probably the working capital cycles are long for wash MSMEs. So probably consider the working capital cycle as a 6 month of repayments instead of 3 months, or designing these term loan or the shorter term loans based on their need instead of the standardization of the product which has been defined. And another part which was discussed, obviously Ashish also mentioned, the TA mitigate risk, especially for the equity and debt capital, and also not just to mitigate risk, but it can also help these companies grow or achieve a scale which can increase ROI for these financials. And then also helping these companies find another stream of revenue by monetizing or developing the sanitation or water credit market, which has been at least happening in the plastic credit. So same can be replicated in water and sanitation space also. And then another challenge, which probably all of the funders would agree, is quantification of the impact. So which can, if that can be standardized for different projects or for the different investments, that can help raise more capital to these companies.
Table we discussed regarding the segment in wash value chain that you see bring more ready and better commercial readiness. So we discussed that among the sanitation value chain, the reuse part where the private industries and the power plant are involved is one of the sectors that is more ready and can be taken up easily, which is a scalable. Then the solar projects in the wash sectors where the cities are now trying to reduce the energy consumptions which has been spent because they are spending a lot amount, maximum amount of the municipal finance has been spent on the energy bills. So through the solar projects how they can be reduced, and there are many PPP projects that are there. Third one was public toilets. I think we on our table have different models where public toilets were commercially ready and private investors showed the willingness to be involved in that. The other was for the water, the solar ATMs, which were used for providing the solar potable water to the local communities, is something which is also a ready and commercially viable project that can be taken up. In terms of what kind of a financial and technical support would be required to scale up the opportunities for impact investors, we found that there is a huge financing gaps when it comes in the bracket of 500K to 2 million, and where the private enterprises are finding that there is no equity or depth or the investors available to fund the projects within that scale. So I think that is something. The second suggestion that came was templatizing the existing blended finance from the existing project, so that it can provide a template in terms of what were the key parameters, what were the results, what were the outcomes that were achieved, so that it can help the other enterprises to enter into this and scale up their models. The third aspect was if we can have one metrics, the impact metrics for the outcome funds under the WASH project, because that is something which is missing. If across the value chain, if we can standardize what would be the impact on the health, on the communities, and if that can be standardized across the private enterprises, would be really helpful to them. In terms of, in terms of one or three key interventions that would be required to create a supportive ecosystem, we found that the WASH specific blended finance funds would be required both at the fund level but also at the program level. The second was the specific venture capital for the WASH. Again, I think was highlighted in the discussion. The third point was government. I think there is a lot of silos that government is working on, especially the government working in the water sector or the sanitation sectors, and the private sector find it really difficult to work with them. So how those sectoral interlinkages and policy convergence could be done at the government level was the highlight that was coming out from the table. If there are any points that anyone would like to add.
One real quick point is the importance of LP level advocacy for more and more WASH-related funds to proliferate. Today, I would argue that it would be easier for a climate tech investor to set up a carbon capture fund as opposed to a WASH fund, notwithstanding the fact that the former has more, in terms of risk-return dynamics, is probably not as favorable as WASH. And so that's probably because most of the LP mandates are geared towards carbon emissions. They have mandates for around emissions and maybe sort of few other things as well. So just elevating the and alerting and sensitizing the LP level stakeholders, prospective LP level stakeholders around the relevance of WASH will be another important thing that I just wanted to add in.
Is this working? Yeah, thanks everyone, and I think the win for us is such an engaged audience. I think we really had thought that 3 hours of such conversations in terms of content, and I think everybody sharing their real insights and suggestions for furthering the sector. But in the end, we always feel that in front of such collective wisdom and all this knowledge sharing, time is the only scarce commodity we have often. But thank you very much. Thanks for all of you for coming here today and making this session as successful, as it has been. And it's all because of you all, because as I said, we are not the sector level experts, all of you are, and it's because of your, insight sharing and all these useful bits is because, this session becomes helpful and successful for us. So for all of you, you've shared all your insights, and all of these will come by way of a white paper, which we'll be publishing in the next month or so. We'll also take away a lot of action points from here, which we will be furthering in the course of, our deliberations and action points along with the industry as we go along. So those are some bits. Sure. We will be sharing the presentation with all the people present in the room today. So you will get it by tonight or maximum by tomorrow. So we will share that, and any other resources if you want us to circulate to the audience alongside that, please reach us, reach out to us today itself. So we will share any further, information or knowledge sharing alongside that. So on that note, I would like to thank all our partners for today. So if it is not, without your help, Karthik, Mayappan, so CWAS, Toilet Board, I think we've not have been able to bring all of this together. And special thanks to Water.org for helping us put this together so beautifully as it turned out. So thank you very much once again. The lunch is served outside, so please don't miss it, and we'll be in touch soon. Thank you.